When I saw my son's wife in that white dress, something inside me trembled, not with pride, but with a chill I couldn't name. That's how the morning began. The one I believed I'd spend officiating my son's wedding. The sunlight filtered through the chapel, windows like gold dust caught in motion. The flowers smelled too sweet, the air too still. I remember holding my Bible, hands steady in front of me, yet my heart wouldn't stop fluttering. It wasn't nerves. I'd married dozens of couples before. Family friends, church members, young people eager to promise forever. But that morning, as I looked at my son David and his bride, Lena, standing beneath the archway of white roses, something in the way they avoided my eyes didn't sit right. I told myself it was emotion. I told myself love could make anyone shake like that. But when Lena whispered, "We actually did this yesterday," in a voice so low I almost thought I imagined it, A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare is playfully written about the exploration of love, marriage, and the unrealistic expectations that can inexorably come along with them. This essay will explore how marriage is portrayed as limiting and difficult, but ultimately worthwhile, commensurate with its origins in a court marriage. This drama speaks throughout for a sophisticated Renaissance philosophy of the nature of love in both its rational and irrational forms. This is shown by depicting that there then existed a significant disparity in the expectations placed on men and women. Hermia embodies this struggle as she defies her father Aegeus's wishes to marry Demetrius, showcasing her desire for autonomy and true love, rather than just fulfilling only her duty to her society. Conversely, men are generally afforded a broader range of achievements and aspirations. They are encouraged to pursue careers, adventures, and personal accomplishments that can lead to social recognition. Demetrius, for instance, initially pursues Hermia out of a sense of entitlement, thinking he can claim her because that is what society expects of her. Another example is the marriage of Theseus and Hippolyta. Their relationship is rooted in conquest and power dynamics, which reflect the expectations of a hierarchical society. Theseus, as the Duke of Athens, represents a figure signifying his authority, and his marriage to a conquered queen, Hippolyta, suggests that marriage can also be about control and possession rather than something much purer. I knew the day wasn't about love at all. It was about secrets. My name is Margaret Ann Holloway, though most folks just call me Pastor Maggie, 58 years old, widow, mother of one, David Holloway Jr., the boy I raised after losing his father far too soon. Our home sits on the edge of Maple Creek, a quiet suburban town with Sunday potlucks and gossip that travels faster than the evening train. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and everybody knows everybody's business. David was the kind of man mothers brag about, tall like his father, same warm eyes, always the first to show up when the church roof leaked or when Mrs. Evelyn's dog ran off again. He worked as an architect, thoughtful, measured, the kind of person who could draw a straight line through chaos. I used to joke that he built buildings the way I built sermons, one careful layer of truth at a time. After his father passed, David became my anchor. We leaned on each other through years of quiet grief. I never pushed him to marry. I only asked that when he did. He'd choose a woman with kindness in her eyes. When he first brought Lena Patterson home, I believed my prayer had been answered. She arrived one Sunday in early May, the kind of day when the dogwoods bloom white and the air smells faintly of lemon and rain. David introduced her at the church social, slender, soft-spoken, with long dark hair and a voice that carried both confidence and grace. "Mom," David said, beaming, "this is Lena. She's the one I told you about." She extended her hand, smiling that practiced smile people wear when they're still figuring out their audience. "Mrs. Holloway, it's an honor. David talks about you all the time." Her tone was polite, almost too polished, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was protective, maybe I just wasn't ready to share my son. Still, Lena seemed genuine enough. She asked about my sermons, complimented the peach cobbler I'd baked for the social, and even volunteered at the charity drive the next week. The church women adored her. "Your David's found himself a gem," they'd say. And for a while, I believed them. The months passed in gentle rhythm. I'd spend mornings pruning the hydrangeas while David stopped by before work to grab a thermos of my coffee. Lena often joined him. She'd sit at my kitchen counter in tailored work clothes, scrolling her phone between sips of tea, offering sweet comments about the decor. "You have such a cozy home. Mrs. Holloway, everything smells like cinnamon and books," I laughed. "That's just age. I've had these walls longer than you've been alive," she giggled. Yet sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression would harden, like someone masking another thought. But I didn't pay it much mind. People are complicated, I told myself. Maybe she was just shy. Maybe the ghost of my husband made her uneasy. That fall, David told me he planned to propose. He took me out for dinner, my favorite diner off Main Street, and said it like he'd been holding it in for months. "Mom, I'm going to ask Lena to marry me," I smiled, pretending my heart wasn't tightening. "That's wonderful, baby. She's a lovely girl." He reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I want you to marry us. Officiate," I asked, half laughing. "David, you know I can't." "You can," he interrupted. "You're licensed. You've married half this town, and you're the only one who truly knows me." I felt tears gather behind my eyes. To be asked that by my only son, it was a mother's dream. I didn't hesitate. "Of course I will." From that day forward, life became a blur of fabric swatches, guest lists, and cake tastings. Lena took control, no surprise, with a precision that impressed even me. She said she wanted something intimate yet timeless. David just nodded through most of it, happy to let her lead. Still, I noticed small things. She avoided discussing her family. She claimed her parents lived up north, but never said where. When I asked if they'd attend the ceremony, she'd quickly change the subject. "I'm not that close with them," she'd say, brushing it off with a smile. "It's complicated. Everyone has complicated families," I thought. But there was a tone, the kind people use when hiding pain or guilt. The night before the wedding, she came to my house. I was finishing a sermon at the kitchen table when she knocked softly, holding a small envelope. "Mrs. Holloway, I just wanted to say thank you," she said, handing me the card. Inside was a handwritten note. "You've given me a second chance at family." I didn't know what she meant, but the words warmed me. If only I had understood what kind of second chance she truly wanted. The day of the ceremony was perfect. Too perfect. In hindsight, I woke before dawn, heart light, air crisp with spring. The chapel was filled with white roses, lace ribbon cascading down the pews. The scent of vanilla candles mingled with the polished wood of the altar. David looked handsome in his navy suit. Lena, radiant in her gown, her veil catching every drop of sunlight. "Ready, Mom?" David whispered. "I've been ready since the day you were born," I said, smiling. When the organ began to play, I stepped forward to the podium, my hand steady on the open Bible. My voice echoed through the stillness. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." But just as the words left my lips, Lena's gaze met mine, not with joy, but with something closer to resignation. Her lips trembled, and she leaned slightly toward me, whispering a sentence that chilled my blood. "We already did this yesterday." For a moment, I froze, still mid-sentence. The audience saw only a proud mother, a pastor glowing with love. But inside my world tilted. Yesterday? What did she mean? Already did this yesterday? I kept going, my voice steady by sheer will, finishing the vows, blessing the union, hearing the applause. But every amen sounded like a lie. The reception was a blur of laughter and photographs. People clinked glasses, children danced, and the DJ played Marvin Gaye's "Ain't No Mountain High Enough." And all I could hear were those 6 words echoing in my mind. When I found Lena by the buffet later, I tried to sound casual. "Sweetheart, what did you mean earlier? About yesterday?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, polished and calm. "Oh, it's nothing. Just nerves," she said. "I meant we rehearsed yesterday." But her eyes darted away too quickly. David joined us, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Just motherly nerves." He kissed my cheek and turned back to greet guests. I watched Lena the rest of the night, how she laughed a little too loud, avoided certain photos, and clutched her phone like it was an anchor, something was wrong. But I told myself, tomorrow. I'd ask again. For that night, I'd let my son have his joy. The newlyweds moved into a house just a few blocks from mine. David insisted. He wanted to be close so I wouldn't get lonely. I pretended not to notice Lena's faint sigh when he said that. She returned to work within a week, at a tech startup she barely spoke about. David dove into new projects. I busied myself with church duties and Bible study classes. Outwardly, life was perfect, but silence carries secrets. And in the quiet weeks that followed, I began to notice small cracks forming. The first came during a Sunday lunch. I'd invited them over after service. Fried chicken crisping in the oven, cornbread cooling on the counter. Lena arrived late, wearing sunglasses indoors. "Headache," she said quickly, removing them only after sitting down. Her eyes were swollen, not red, just tired. David brushed it off. "She's been working overtime again." But later, when she helped me wash dishes, I saw a faint ring mark on her finger. Not the new wedding band, but a tan line, like she'd worn another ring for years. "You have a mark there," I said gently. She looked down, startled. "Oh, it's from an old family heirloom." "Lost it," her voice wavered, just slightly. I smiled and said nothing. But I filed it away. Maple Creek has a rhythm of rumor, whispers that hum beneath every hymn. 2 weeks after the wedding, a woman from the choir approached me. "Pastor Maggie," she said, lowering her voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but isn't that Lena Patterson who used to date, well, you know, that banker from Eldridge?" I blinked. "I wouldn't know," she pursed her lips. "Oh, just something I overheard at Dillard's. They say she left him right before his troubles." I brushed her off politely, but my stomach turned. Troubles? What troubles? That night, after evening prayers, I looked up Eldridge in the news archives. An article appeared. "Local banker arrested in fraud scheme. Fiancé vanishes before trial." The photo showed a young man, mid-30s, beside a blurred-out woman. The shape of her face, even in shadow, made my breath catch. It couldn't be. I closed the laptop, heart pounding, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. People look alike. The internet can deceive, but that night, sleep wouldn't come. In the following weeks, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Lena truly was who she said she was. Just a woman with a past she didn't want to revisit. Still, whenever she visited, I found myself studying her. The way her smile never reached her eyes. How she'd flinch when someone mentioned honesty or faith. One afternoon, I stopped by their house unannounced, bringing over homemade pie. As mothers do. Lena opened the door half an inch, surprised. "Oh, Mrs. Holloway. We weren't expecting anyone. I know, dear. I just had too much pie on my hands." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, boxes were stacked near the hallway, labeled documents, legal, storage. Strange for a couple only just settling in. David wasn't home. I placed the pie on the counter. "You two moving again?" "Oh, no. Just organizing?" Her tone was clipped, her posture tense. I nodded, scanning the living room. On the mantel sat a framed photo, not of the wedding, but of Lena standing beside a man in a dark suit. The picture was half hidden behind a candle, but I recognized the same shadowed face from the article. Before I could ask, she quickly lifted the photo and slipped it into a drawer. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching dusk settle over Maple Creek, I replayed every conversation, every look. Could it be possible that my son had no idea? Or worse, did he? The night insects began their chorus. Somewhere, a train horn echoed in the distance. I thought about the vow I'd spoken over them, the words in the sight of God. If Lena had truly been married, or was married, before the ceremony, then what had I done? The air felt heavy with guilt I didn't yet deserve. I opened my Bible, seeking comfort, but the verse my eyes landed on struck deeper than I wished. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. I closed the book slowly, whispering to the quiet, "Lord, let me be wrong," but I knew. A storm was coming. A week later, I received a letter addressed to Margaret Holloway, officiant of Holloway-Patterson Union. The return address was Eldridge County Court. Inside was a formal notice, a request for records confirming a marriage officiated between Lena Patterson and Daniel Grant, dated the day before my son's ceremony. The paper trembled in my hand. Her whisper from the altar echoed again. "We already did this yesterday. Now I understand." I must have read that court notice a dozen times before sunrise. Each line carved a deeper groove into my heart. Request for confirmation of marriage officiated by Margaret Ann Holloway, Maple Creek Parish, between Lena Patterson and Daniel Grant, April 12th. My son's wedding was on April 13th. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold, staring at that thin white paper like it was a mirror of shame. Had someone used my name? My credentials? Or worse, had my new daughter-in-law truly married another man the day before pledging herself to my son? At 7 o'clock sharp, I walked to the church office. The key trembled in my fingers. Inside, I opened the registrar's ledger, a thick, worn book with handwritten entries of every ceremony I'd performed in 20 years. The last line read, April 13th, David Holloway and Lena Patterson Holloway, and right above it, in faint print, someone had forged my initials. Same handwriting, same looped M, but the signature wasn't mine. By mid-morning, I was driving to Eldridge County Court, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The courthouse stood proud and beige against the sky, the kind of building that smells like dust and disinfectant. A clerk named Melissa met me at the counter. "Ma'am, can I help you?" I slid the letter toward her. "I received this. There must be a mistake." She adjusted her glasses, typing my name into the database. After a moment, she frowned. "No mistake, Reverend Holloway. We have a digital record here. Wedding license signed and notarized yesterday, with your efficient ID." "Yesterday," I repeated. She turned the screen toward me. The bride's name, Lena Patricia Patterson. The groom, Daniel Grant. And my own digital signature, pasted from a previous file. My stomach twisted. "That's identity fraud," Melissa bit her lip. "You'd have to file a report. But it does happen. Sometimes folks use a minister's credentials online for quick elopements." Elopement. That word tasted sour. I thanked her, walked out, and sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before starting the engine. The courthouse clock struck noon, but inside me, time stopped. That evening, I called David. "Sweetheart, are you home?" "Hey, Mom," he said cheerfully. "Yeah, Lena's making dinner. You should come by." My throat tightened. "I'll be there in 10. When I arrived, the smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Lena moved around the kitchen gracefully, humming a tune I couldn't place. David kissed my cheek, oblivious. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said softly. "But I need to speak to Lena, alone." The room fell silent. David glanced between us, uneasy. "Sure, I'll check on the laundry." When he left, I placed the letter on the counter. "Would you like to explain this?" Her smile faded. She looked at the page, then at me, eyes cold, calculating. "I was wondering when you'd find out." I blinked. "So it's true," she exhaled, the calm unraveling. "Yes, I married Daniel Grant. But it's not what you think." I wanted to shout, but my voice came out quieter, sharper for its restraint. "You stood in front of my son, or in front of me, and lied to God." Her lips trembled. "I didn't lie. Daniel and I were never truly married. It was annulled immediately. He forced me into it for legal reasons." I stared. "Annulled?" "There's no record of that. It's pending," she whispered. "Please, Mrs. Holloway, I love David. I was scared that if he knew, he'd call off the wedding. I just wanted a clean start. A clean start built on lies?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "You wouldn't understand." I stepped back, the room spinning. "You're right. I don't." David returned with a folded towel in his hand, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Lena turned toward him, her voice suddenly soft, desperate. "Your mom found something online about Daniel Grant. It's not what it looks like." He frowned. "Daniel Grant? The guy from Eldridge? You used to—" She cut him off. "It was years ago." My son looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "Mom?" I wanted to protect him from the blow, but truth demanded to be spoken. She married him. The day before she married you. David froze. What? Lena shook her head wildly. It wasn't real, David. It was paperwork, that's all. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Finally, David whispered, I need some air. He walked out without another word. The next few days were chaos. David moved back into my guest room, his eyes hollow. Lena stayed in their house, calling, texting, begging for forgiveness. Every night I heard my son pacing the hallway, the floor creaking under the weight of betrayal. He barely ate, barely spoke. One morning, I found him sitting at the dining table, staring at his wedding ring. She said it was annulled, he murmured. Do you think that's possible? I said gently. You deserve truth before forgiveness. He nodded, jaw tight. Then I'll find it. David hired a private investigator, a retired cop named Carla Mendez, to look into Lena's history. Within a week, Carla called me directly. Reverend, you might want to sit down. She explained that Lena had indeed been engaged to Daniel Grant for over a year. They'd registered a civil marriage for business reasons, to transfer assets while Daniel was under investigation. When authorities closed in, Daniel fled, and Lena filed to annul quietly, never finalizing it. She used your credentials because Daniel trusted your name, Carla said. He'd attended one of your charity events in Eldridge years ago. He knew your digital signature was public. So she forged it, I said. Looks that way. But that makes the ceremony with your son invalid. My heart sank. Invalid. That word carried more weight than I could bear. When David learned the truth, he confronted Lena again, this time not in private. He went to her workplace, a sleek glass building downtown, and demanded she step outside. Witnesses said his voice was calm, almost eerily so. You could have told me, he said. I'd have understood. But you made a fool of my mother, and me. She tried to reason, but he handed her the investigator's report. Annulment never filed. Fraudulent efficient record. Forged signature. Tell me, which part was love? The story spread fast. Small towns have long memories. Within days, church members whispered, co-workers gossiped, and even the local news picked up the courthouse error that had used my name. I received calls from colleagues, sympathetic but curious. Some asked if I'd lost my credentials. I wanted to disappear. That Sunday, I stood before my congregation for the first time since the scandal broke. The pews were full, but the air felt colder. I took a breath. Before we begin, I owe you the truth. I explained what happened, the misuse of my name, the deception, the pain. I asked for prayer, not pity. Some nodded. Others averted their eyes. But when I stepped down from the pulpit, Mrs. Evelyn, the oldest member of our church, took my hand and said softly, Even pastors raise prodigals, dear. Let God sort the rest. Her kindness cracked something inside me. I cried for the first time in weeks. A week later, Lena appeared on my porch. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. Please, Mrs. Holloway, I just want to talk. I let her in, mostly because I wanted to hear the truth from her own mouth. She sat at the kitchen table, the same place I'd once welcomed her into the family, and spoke in a trembling voice, I never meant to hurt David or you. Daniel was dangerous. He controlled everything, my money, my job. The only way out was to marry him on paper so he'd transfer my name off his business before he was arrested. I thought if I erased that past, I could start over. I folded my hands. But you didn't erase it. You buried it alive. She nodded, tears finally falling. I panicked when the courthouse sent those forms. I didn't think they'd reach you. Then why whisper to me during the wedding? Her shoulders shook. Guilt. I couldn't stand there knowing what I'd done. For a moment, I saw the frightened woman beneath the lies. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. You took something sacred, I said quietly. Not just a ceremony, trust. My son's and mine. That's not something you can annul. She covered her face and sobbed. I'll make it right. I'll file the annulment. It's not my forgiveness you need, I interrupted. It's God's and David's, if he ever chooses. She stood slowly, nodding, and left without another word. That evening, David returned home. He looked exhausted but lighter, as if he'd finally stopped blaming himself. "I met with a lawyer," he said. "He's filing for annulment, officially this time. It'll take a few months," I nodded. "And Lena?" "She's moving out of Maple Creek, said she needs to find herself again." He exhaled, leaning against the doorway. "Part of me still loves her." "Isn't that stupid?" "No," I said softly. "Love doesn't vanish with truth. It just changes shape." He smiled faintly, then looked toward the window where the sun was setting behind the trees. "Maybe someday I'll forgive her. But not today." Even with the legal mess fading, the moral wound remained. I replayed that ceremony endlessly, my voice blessing a union that never existed. Each time I opened my Bible to prepare a sermon, I stumbled on verses about truth, honesty, and vows. It felt like God himself was reminding me that faith isn't blind trust. It's courage to see. I took time off from the church, a rare thing for me, and spent mornings tending the garden, letting the silence work on me. Sometimes David joined me. We wouldn't talk much, just sit with coffee, watching the light shift through the leaves. Healing isn't loud. It's the quiet acceptance of what can't be undone. 3 months later, a letter arrived, postmarked from Chicago. Inside, a short note in neat handwriting. "Mrs. Holloway, I filed all the papers. Daniel is officially out of my life. I know that doesn't fix what I did, but I wanted you to know. Thank you for being kinder than I deserved." Lena, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with the court notice. One represented deceit, the other repentance. Both were chapters of the same story. Summer melted into fall. David returned to work, quiet but steady. The church welcomed me back with grace. People had stopped whispering. The town's appetite for scandal had moved on. Yet one Sunday morning, as sunlight poured through the stained glass window, I saw Lena sitting in the last pew. She didn't stay long, just enough to catch my eye and nod once before slipping out. I never saw her again. The hardest sound in my house wasn't the creak of the stairs or the ticking clock on the mantel. It was silence. That thick, haunting kind that settles in after truth detonates. After Lena left Maple Creek, quiet wrapped itself around everything. No more phone calls from reporters. No more gossip at the diner. Just the echo of what we'd lost. David still slept in the guest room, though his own house stood only 3 blocks away. He said he couldn't bear to walk through those halls yet, that every room smelled like her perfume. So he stayed, haunting my kitchen at odd hours, stirring coffee he never drank. I didn't press him. Some wounds have to air out before they scab. 2 weeks later, his lawyer, Mr. Henderson, came by, a polite man in an old gray suit who always smelled faintly of cedar polish. He brought paperwork. The annulment had gone through, finalized, neat black ink declaring the marriage null and void. David signed in silence. I watched his hand tremble only once, right before the final initial. When it was done, he exhaled, a sound between relief and grief. "It's over," he said. "But the truth is, it never really ends. Paper may close a case, but hearts don't file so neatly. I thought once the courthouse corrected the fraud, my reputation would heal too. But small towns remember rumors longer than facts. Some folks still whispered when I passed. There goes the pastor who married her own son to a fraud. Others offered pity disguised as kindness. Don't worry, Maggie, God tests his strongest soldiers. I smiled politely, but every word scraped raw. I decided to act. Not for pride, but for truth. I scheduled a meeting with the church council, 7 men and women who'd served beside me for decades. When I walked into the fellowship hall that night, the air smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. They sat in a semicircle, papers in hand, faces a mix of concern and caution. I stood tall. "I didn't come to beg for reputation," I said. "I came to make it right." Then I laid out the proof. The investigator's report, the court documents, the letters. I showed them exactly how my name had been used, how the system had failed, and how I had corrected it. When I finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Finally, Deacon Ellis, a man who'd known my late husband, cleared his throat. "Maggie, we never doubted your heart. We just needed the facts." He signed the motion restoring my efficient license without restriction. And just like that, truth reclaimed its place over rumor. Still, I left the hall shaking. Vindication doesn't feel like victory, it feels like exhaustion. That night, as we sat on the porch under a sky full of crickets and silver stars, David spoke for the first time in days. "Mom," he said quietly, "why do people betray those who love them most?" I looked at him, my boy who'd carried too much for one lifetime. "Because love demands honesty, and not everyone's strong enough to give it," I said. "Sometimes fear dresses itself up as protection." He stared into the dark. "She said she lied to protect me." "She lied to protect herself," I replied softly. "And that's the difference," he nodded slowly. "I want to move on. But I don't know who I am without the anger." "Then start small," I said. "Forgive yourself first. The rest will follow." Eventually, David returned to his architecture firm. He stopped by one morning in a crisp white shirt, hair neatly trimmed. "I'm ready," he said. I packed him lunch, same turkey sandwich he loved as a child, and watched him drive away. For the first time in months, the sound of his engine pulling out didn't ache. It sounded like forward motion. Later that day, I received a call from the Maple Creek Gazette. A young journalist wanted to write a follow-up piece about how faith leaders handle scandal. I almost said no, but then I thought, if people are going to talk, let them hear the truth from my own mouth. The article ran the next Sunday. The headline read, "When Forgiveness Starts with Yourself, Pastor Maggie's Journey Through Betrayal." It was honest, humble, and mercifully kind. Within days, I got letters from strangers, women who'd been deceived, men who'd lost faith and found it again. It reminded me that pain, when shared, becomes ministry. 3 months later, the phone rang late one evening. I almost ignored it, but something urged me to answer. "Mrs. Holloway?" The voice was unfamiliar, male, gravelly, and nervous. "This is Daniel Grant." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He continued, I heard about what happened. Lena told me you lost your good name because of me." I needed to apologize. I gripped the receiver tighter. "Are you still in trouble with the law?" A bitter laugh. "Still fighting the cases. But I'm trying to make amends. She wasn't the villain, Mrs. Holloway. Neither was I. We were just two desperate people making bad choices." I said nothing. "I just wanted you to know," he added. "I never meant for your son to get hurt." Before I could respond, the line clicked dead. I stood there, phone in hand, the hum of the dial tone filling the room. For the first time, I wondered if forgiveness was larger than I'd allowed it to be. The following Sunday, I delivered a sermon titled "The Weight of Secrets." I didn't name names or reference my son, but everyone understood. Sin doesn't always look like darkness, I told them. Sometimes it looks like silence, the things we don't say because we fear being unloved. When service ended, one by one, people came forward, some in tears, some in gratitude. Confessions spilled quietly, small lies, buried grudges, old wounds. What began as my shame became a kind of cleansing for the whole church. Even Deacon Ellis wept. That day, I realized something: truth might break families, but it also rebuilds communities when handled with grace. Autumn came with a bitter chill. I thought we'd seen the last of Lena, until one morning her name appeared again. Not in gossip, but in the Eldridge Times. Whistleblower exposes banking fraud ring. Former fiancé assists federal case. The article said she'd testified against Daniel Grant, providing evidence that helped convict him. A photograph accompanied the piece. Lena leaving a courthouse, face thinner, older, eyes steady. David read the article in silence. When he finished, he folded it neatly and said, "Maybe she finally did the right thing." I nodded. Maybe she did. There was no gloating. No bitterness, just quiet understanding that redemption doesn't erase pain, but it proves it can be repurposed. Months later, the town hosted its annual Faith and Service banquet, a formal dinner recognizing community leaders. When the organizer asked if I'd deliver the keynote, I hesitated. "Are you sure the town wants me speaking again?" I asked with a wry smile. She laughed. "Pastor Maggie, you taught us that truth can survive gossip. That's worth a speech." The night of the banquet, I stood at the podium in a navy dress I hadn't worn since my husband's retirement dinner. David sat near the front, arms folded, pride soft in his eyes. I began softly. A year ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was being humiliated. But humiliation is just truth revealed before we're ready. The real tragedy is refusing to learn from it. The crowd listened in perfect stillness. When I finished, the applause felt less like approval and more like release, for all of us. Afterward, a young woman approached me. "I was married to a liar once," she said quietly. "Your story made me believe in second chances," I smiled. "Then that's all the redemption I needed." By the first spring after the scandal, David had changed. He smiled again. Not the boyish grin of old, but a man's quiet resilience. One afternoon, he mentioned a new colleague at work, Melissa Hart, an interior designer. "She's easy to talk to," he said, blushing slightly. I didn't push, only listened. Weeks later, he brought her by for dinner. A warm, grounded woman with a laugh that filled every room. I watched them together. How gently she listened, how David's shoulders eased. And I whispered a prayer of thanks under my breath. Maybe healing really does arrive disguised as ordinary kindness. Then, one quiet morning in April, another letter arrived, handwritten, the same familiar looping script. "Mrs. Holloway, I wanted you to know I've joined a nonprofit that helps women escape financial abuse. Your words that day, that I buried the truth alive, stuck with me. You were right. I hope someday your son can forgive me. But even if he doesn't, I'll spend the rest of my life making amends." Lena P.I. read it twice, then tucked it in my Bible beside the verse from Luke 8:17, the one about secrets coming to light. The page smelled faintly of lavender ink. I closed the book gently and whispered, "Amen." The story that once humiliated our family became something else entirely. At the next community forum, a panel discussion on faith and integrity, I was invited again, this time to share how transparency can heal. People asked difficult questions about betrayal, forgiveness, and reputation. I answered honestly, not perfectly. When the evening ended, someone asked, "Do you think your daughter-in-law deserves forgiveness?" I paused, then smiled sadly. Deserve is a word for contracts. Grace is for people. So yes, she deserves it, because I do too. The audience stood in applause, not for me, but for the idea that even broken vows can lead to stronger faith. Life slipped into a gentler rhythm. David and Melissa grew close. The garden bloomed early that year, the hydrangeas bursting in colors I hadn't seen in decades. Every morning, I'd brew 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for whoever needed company, and sit by the window watching light spill over Maple Creek. The town felt different now, kinder, softer. Sometimes new couples came to me for premarital counseling. I still hesitated when I opened my officiant book, not from fear, but from reverence. Each signature mattered. Each vow carried weight, and every time I said, "By the power vested in me," I remembered that power isn't in paper or position. It's in truth. One evening, David came home with that same nervous grin I'd seen years before. "Mom," he said, "Melissa and I have been talking. We want to get married." I laughed softly. "Deja vu, huh?" He grinned. "Maybe. But this time, I want someone else to officiate." I nodded. "Good choice," he added quickly, "but I want you to bless it. Just not sign it." Tears filled my eyes. "Deal." The ceremony was simple, in the same chapel where the chaos had begun. No grand flowers, no lavish gowns, just sincerity. When the new officiant pronounced them husband and wife, David turned to me, eyes shining. This time, the silence in the room wasn't tension. It was peace. After the wedding, I spoke briefly to the guests. "I once stood here carrying shame," I said, my voice steady. "Now I stand carrying grace. May every person here remember, and truth may bruise, but it never breaks love that's real." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Even months later, people said that was the most honest blessing they'd ever heard. A year after that second wedding, news came that Daniel Grant had been sentenced. He'd pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud. The judge referenced Lena's testimony as instrumental. David read the article aloud at breakfast, then quietly said, "Looks like she finally faced her own truth." I nodded. Sometimes justice and mercy shake hands. He smiled faintly. You should write that in a sermon. That Sunday, I closed service with a new verse. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. Afterward, I stood by the door greeting parishioners. David and Melissa came through holding hands. When they hugged me, the whole church erupted in applause, not for ceremony but for restoration. I realized then that forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a lifetime of choosing peace over proof. After David's new wedding, Maple Creek settled into the kind of peace only earned through storms. The gossip dried up. The pews filled again. And in that strange stillness, I learned how to breathe without flinching. Mornings began with birdsong and the faint hum of lawnmowers in the distance. I'd pour coffee, step out onto the porch, and let the sunlight rest on my face. Some days I still thought about Lena, not with anger, but curiosity. Where was she now? Did she ever find joy after guilt? Then I'd remind myself that not every story we start needs to end in our sight. Some just fade into peace elsewhere. One afternoon, I found myself kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds between the hydrangeas, and it struck me, forgiveness is like gardening. You clear the roots not to forget what grew there, but to make room for something new. A month after their honeymoon, Melissa stopped by my house with a box. I have something for you, she said, smiling. Inside was a handcrafted wooden cross, simple and beautiful. David had built it, and she'd painted it white, the same color as the roses from his first wedding. He wanted to reclaim the color, she said softly. To make it mean peace again. I traced the grain of the wood with my fingers, my throat tight. You two are teaching me things I thought I already knew, I whispered. Melissa smiled. You taught him how to heal. He's just passing it back. Later that year, the church board voted to remodel the small chapel where it had all happened. New floors, new pews, same spirit, they said. When they asked what inscription I wanted engraved near the altar, I thought for a long moment and finally replied, Truth spoken in love heals generations. It was simple, but it carried everything I'd learned. The day they unveiled it, the sun fell just right through the stained glass, lighting up the words like fire. I wept quietly in the back pew, not from sorrow but from awe, that something so broken could become beautiful again. That fall, I received one last surprise. A young woman showed up at the church office, slender, dressed modestly, eyes familiar. Mrs. Holloway. She asked. Yes? She hesitated, then said, I'm Rachel, Lena's sister. My breath caught. Oh. She asked me to deliver this, Rachel said, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a photo. Lena at a women's shelter event, surrounded by smiling volunteers. On the back, a note in careful handwriting. I finally found my calling. I use my story to help others leave deception behind. Thank you for showing me that truth doesn't have to hate to be strong. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. How is she? Rachel smiled faintly. Healthier, happier. She said she's at peace with the past. I nodded slowly. Then so am I. David visited every Sunday evening. Sometimes Melissa joined, sometimes not. We didn't always talk about the past, but it hovered there. Not heavy anymore, just present, like a scar that no longer hurt to touch. One night, over dinner, he said quietly, Mom, I never thanked you. For standing up for the truth, even when it broke your heart. I smiled. It's what mothers do, baby. We break so our children can mend, he chuckled softly. You sound like one of your sermons. Maybe, I said, but this one's real. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know what's strange? I don't regret any of it now. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it made me... More me, I nodded. Pain has a way of stripping us down to what's real. Once the pretending's gone, what's left is truth. And that's where peace lives. The following spring, a young couple from the next town asked me to officiate their wedding. At first, I hesitated. The old fear crept back, what if something goes wrong again? But then I thought about that white cross hanging in my living room, and about how every broken piece of my past had led me here. I agreed. On the wedding day, the chapel glowed in soft gold light. The bride's dress shimmered like morning dew. As I opened my Bible, my hands no longer trembled. Love, I said, isn't proven by the ceremony you stand in, but by the truth you live afterward. When I pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in joy. And for the first time in a long while, those words felt sacred again. That summer, we held a family dinner, just me, David, and Melissa. The table was full, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet tea. At one point, David said, "You know what's funny? I used to think betrayal destroyed families. But sometimes it reveals which parts were unbreakable." I smiled. Exactly. It doesn't ruin you. It refines you. Melissa raised her glass. To truth, messy, painful, but worth it. We clinked glasses, laughter spilling through the house. For the first time in years, the sound didn't echo. It settled. Like home. That night after they left, I sat at my desk and wrote something I'd never written before. A letter to my younger self. Dear Margaret, you will think you've failed. You'll stand before the altar, your heart pounding with shame, believing you blessed a lie. But years later, you'll understand. Truth needed your voice, not your perfection. You'll see your son smile again, your church forgive, and your faith deepen through the cracks. So hold on. The storm isn't punishment. It's purification. With love, the woman you became. I sealed it and tucked it into my Bible beside the letters from Lena. 3 stories, all bound by grace. Seasons passed. Maple Creek kept on living. Births, weddings, funerals, the steady hum of ordinary miracles. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the chapel window and barely recognize the woman I once was. So guarded. So certain that control was safety. Now I understand something deeper. Control is just fear in disguise. Faith is what happens when you trust that even the wrong turns led somewhere right. And I had proof, because every heartbreak in that story had delivered me exactly here. When I look back now, I don't remember the scandal first. I remember the sunlight on the chapel floor that morning, how it fell in the shape of a cross right between my son and the woman who would change everything. I remember the smell of white roses, the hum of a hymn faint in the distance, and the tremor in my chest when truth whispered its first warning, and I remember how silence became my teacher, how it taught me that. Sometimes the worst day of your life hands you the story that saves someone else's, so if you're listening, tonight, maybe sitting alone, wondering how people you trusted could twist your faith, let me tell you something. The same hand that allowed the breaking will guide the rebuilding. It won't be quick. It won't be clean. But one day you'll look at the ruins and see a foundation strong enough to build peace upon, because truth may burn bridges, but it lights the path home. In the end, Lena found redemption. David found love. And I found grace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving without losing your tenderness. If I learned anything, it's this. Forgiveness isn't for the one who wronged you. It's for the part of you that refuses to stay bitter. I forgave Lena, quietly, fully, without ceremony. Not because she asked, but because I needed to breathe again. And in that breath, I finally felt free. So now I'll leave you with this question. If someone you loved betrayed you, not out of malice, but out of fear, could you forgive them? Would you have stood before that altar again, knowing what I know now? Or would you have walked away sooner? Tell me in the comments, because maybe your answer will help the next broken heart find its way to healing. And remember, life doesn't always give us perfect stories, but it always gives us the power to rewrite their endings. Thank you for listening. And if my story reminded you that truth and grace can coexist, don't forget to share, subscribe, and stay for the next one, because somewhere out there, another mother is learning what I did, that love tested is love proven.